2, 1.
Boom, and welcome to the Big Honker Podcast, brought to you by our good friends at Cedar Run Decoys. Check out Corey, makes great decoys. If you go into the new Ducks Unlimited headquarters in Memphis, all the decoys there are Cedar Run Decoys. Corey's a good friend of ours. He does the Stanfield, the Big Honker collection, which me and Andy had the Eurasian Widgeon, and then Michelle had the Yellow Lucky Duck with all the proceeds going to St. Jude's. And then we got a new one coming out. It's going to be the Tony Stanfield one, which should be just a fat duck, but it's not. It's going to be the Mexican tree duck, so that'll be pretty cool. So anyways, I'm Jeff Stanfield, Andy Shaver, with us today from Fort Worth, Texas, the president of the Reata Restaurant, my favorite place to eat downtown Fort Worth, Mr. Mike, and I know I'm going to pronounce the last name wrong, Micallef. Is that close, or how bad did I screw it up? I knew I jacked it up. It's okay. That's pretty much par for the course here. How are you, Mike?
I'm great. How are y'all doing today?
We are good. We are wonderful.
I feel like a pilot. We got our departure on time. We were a little early, as a matter of fact. I'm feeling good about this.
So you're doing good today?
Feeling good about this. Yeah.
When we ate at your place during the Bass Classic. Me and Michelle go there when we go to Fort Worth. If we're there 2 nights, we always eat there one time. How did y'all get into the Reata business? And for everybody to know, the Reata is at downtown. Is it Sundance Square, basically? Is that where you're at?
We're in downtown Fort Worth. We're not part of Sundance Square anymore. But yeah, we're in downtown Fort Worth. We're actually in a condo building called the Tower. But when we first came to Fort Worth, it was actually the Bank One Tower was actually an office building. But kind of getting back to your original question, God, how did we get into the restaurant business? You know, part of it is you got to know my dad. He's a serial entrepreneur. And when he was 24, he was up in Michigan. A silicone rubber company had gone bankrupt. These guys out of Chicago were buying parts from him. So they ended up buying that business. And they brought my dad on to run it till they found a really good manager because he was only 24. Well, I think he did a great job, grew that business. And then in the 70s, they were looking at making a change, looking at moving to locations. And originally, you know, they were looking at going to mineral wells because if you go back in history, mineral wells is where it was called Fort Walters, but that's where they basically trained all the helicopter pilots for Vietnam. So they were shutting down the base in 75 or 74. There were some government incentives to help prop up the town to try to make it through the transition. So when my dad was looking for locations, you know, he looked at mineral wells. Now, I mean, why did he look at Texas? I think one, you know, Texas was certainly friendly to business. I think the other side is that, you know, when my dad was a little kid, I think he listened to Wolfman Jack out of Del Rio or Acuna,
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, I think my dad thought of himself as a cowboy. He wanted to be a cowboy. He certainly had that persona and that basically adventuresomeness that he wanted to look at coming to Texas. So brought that business. Getting back to the story. So looked at mineral wells, was at the Dairy Queen in Weatherford, Texas. And you have to know my dad's a great storyteller. I was sitting in the Dairy Queen talking to the guy behind him in line. It happened to be the city manager. And the guy said, why don't you look at Weatherford? So they did look at Weatherford, and they ended up with the city of Weatherford starting the little industrial park kind of on the northwest side of town. So moved that business into Texas in 75, just before I was born. And then, you know, had been in Texas. We had owned, had a small place on the Clear Fork of the Trinity that I moved to in 81, kind of out in Aledo. But before Aledo had a good football team.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, before it was really known, there was no grocery store. There really wasn't anything out there at the time. But then, you know, there in the 90s was looking for a bigger place. We had some friends that had a ranch by Kent, Texas, which is kind of on the north end of the Davis Mountains. So started looking in the area and ended up buying a ranch north of Alpine in 1991. And, you know, my dad had been out there a couple of years, didn't have a good place to eat. And, you know, in his mind, you know, it's a new business to get into, and opened up the first Reata in Alpine in 95.
That was a good time to get on out there, too, because that's before it really blew up and become a touristy place, right?
It has. I mean, that, you know, it's gone through a lot of transitions out there right now. And I think right now, I think one of the transitions we're having is really Sul Ross as a university has struggled a little bit. But I think that has been, you know, Sul Ross has been really one of the differentiators at Alpine from a lot of other West Texas towns. because you had the university there that was kind of a stable employer. Where certainly if you get from Alpine and you go back toward Midland, all those cities are basically based around the oil and gas industry and through that boom bust cycle, which really Alpine never really experienced.
Yeah, Pecos, I know, is just growing like it's crazy. I think they got the second largest tax base in the state for school with like $60 billion or something. I mean, it's an absolutely crazy how much money pumping through them economies right now out there.
Yeah. No, and you see it, and I think, if you go back in time, you see the busts too. I'm not old enough to really remember those as well as a lot of other people. And we're not tied into the oil and gas business, as much as a lot of other of our friends or a lot of other businesses are, but it's certainly been that case.
Well, I graduated in high school in 86, and I think 81 or 80, probably about 83 or 84, we had the big bust. I think oil went down to like $8 a barrel. And I'm telling you right now, you couldn't hardly find a job in North Texas worth a very good job.
Yeah.
When, it's not like nowadays, these kids, if you're 19, 18 years old, you graduate high school, you can go to the oil field tomorrow and start making $100,000 a year. You're going to work 100 hours a week, but you can make really good money.
And I think that's been part of the struggle for Sul Ross is that, you've got these kids that are graduating high school and they can go get a good job and they might tell themselves, I can always go back to school, but I may not be able to make the money that I can make right now that I can in the oil field.
Do you, so is Sul Ross, I haven't heard about Sul Ross in years. Are their enrollment way down now out there?
So, and I just get general data from the university. So, but when we opened, there were about 2,500 in total enrollment. And then I asked last year, I said, what's the enrollment? And it's down to 1,400.
Wow.
But then, my sister lives out there and she gets her taxes done by one of the professors. And the professor made this comment to her saying, well, none of my rodeo kids live in Alpine. They're all taking online classes.
Huh.
Which, hey, I think online classes is a great option for these kids to have. But so the in-person enrollment is probably between 550 and 650 right now. So obviously that impact that it has on the city, is dramatic. You don't have as many people, going out to dinner, buying groceries, but then, as far as those people we have with the restaurant in Alpine, people to work there as servers at the restaurant, there's just not as much of a pool to pull from as there was if you go back 20 years ago.
Yeah. Is that something that you're facing right now? Is it getting harder and harder to find a wait staff?
I think it is, and part of it's post-COVID, and like I said, I'm so glad the kids have the online options. And in reality, some of these kids that are taking these college courses now, I spoke with the sheriff there in Brewster County, Ronnie Dodson, and he basically said a lot of these kids are still in high school, so it's great that these kids in high school are getting college credits. But I think it maybe masks the issues that Sul Ross is having. And I think, Sul Ross is part of the Texas Independent University system. It's not part of a Texas A&M or Texas Tech, which I don't think that doesn't help out either.
Yeah. Texas Tech's making a big, like they're with Hardin Simmons now.
Midwestern, I think, in Wichita's also got
Texas
a Texas Tech deal now too.
Maybe even ACU. Is ACU Texas Tech?
I don't think so.
Just Hardin Simmons?
I think so.
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm a big fan of anything Texas. We've got lots of friends at A&M, but I've got a lot of friends at Tech. And, one of the things that I think that keeps Texas at least a little bit closer to the West Texas Rancher is that Ranch and Heritage Center there in Lubbock.
Yeah. I graduated from Tech, so I got a little bit of a bias.
Yeah.
And Lubbock's a great town. I mean, Lubbock, it's big enough. Like I saw recently, I think they're up to like 250,000 people.
It's
there,
growing like crazy.
But it still feels pretty small. So I'm a fan of Lubbock.
Lubbock, Texas is the most underrated city in Texas. If you're a single man, I would go to Lubbock, Texas, and I would go to the United on the south side of the campus there.
HEB's a new place.
No, United.
HEB. I'm telling you.
Anyways, you go to one of them grocery stores right there, and it's the yoga pants capital of the world. So that's a good place to meet beautiful women right there. I would say would be Texas Tech for you single men. So Sul Ross, I'm assuming all universities right now, I think we're going to see a big drop in enrollments everywhere because college just isn't the answer like it used to be. I think college is going to become for the really, really poor kids that are smart and for the really, really rich kids that don't want to grow up yet, that are going to go off and live on daddy's money for a little bit longer. I think that's the kind of trend we're having. And I think that's the way college was probably in the 50s.
I don't totally disagree with you. I mean, I think, I do think that I really do believe that like the college experience needs to be readvantaged a little bit. Texas Tech, they've got a great restaurant hotel management school. And nobody from Lubbock or Tech hate me. The problem is it's in Lubbock, right? Where if that same school was in Fort Worth or Dallas, some of those kids going to school, they could be working at a Capital Grill or an Eddie V's, or really high-end white tablecloth restaurant while they're going to school. And I think when you're in an environment that has a lot of white tablecloth restaurants, that rising tide raises all boats. Mm-hmm. It creates a better environment and even a better experience for the customers, but also a better learning experience for the wait staff. Because part of the education from the wait staff is really through the liquor distributors and the wine distributors, where there's a lot more distributors and a lot more sales reps in Dallas Fort Worth that has 7.5 million people than there are in Lubbock. That metro area might only have 350,000.
That's a good point.
But how much of that job could just be on that? But I think that kind of goes back to what Jeff was saying. Like, we have to have a degree for this hospitality. Like a lot of that should just be learned on the job, right?
Well, and to your point, and so I guess my thought, to finish my thought is that, your first 2 years, if you decide to go to that, can be anywhere. But then your last 2 years need to be more in person. Right. And I really think where the restaurant, hotel, or the college education matters less with the day-to-day operations of the restaurant, but you want to open up your own restaurant. You want to start having to borrow money to do that. You're having to make that investment. You're now evaluating return on investment and cap rates and things like that. I think some of those more accounting principles might be better learned in school than in person. Now, that being so, what I'm saying is that your first 2 years can be in Lubbock or can be anywhere, but I'd love to see your last 2 years. They need to be more of in a location that's going to allow you to do great internships. And one of the things I did is I went to the ranch management school at TCU. The greatest thing about the ranch management school is that everybody's in the same class, so it's treated a little bit more like a master's program. But you go to class 6 hours a day. So it basically double what a normal college student is going to. But the best thing is you do 5-day long field trips. And then you have a whole bunch of day trips around Fort Worth. And that allows you to get out in the field and really learn from the people that are doing it on a daily basis.
Yeah, that part, opening the doors and doing the field trips, that's invaluable because you get access to people that are doing what you want to do.
I've come so far on this college thing that I'm a fanatic on this thought here, and I'm in a small group, but I think that you ought to be able to go to school to learn whatever you're going to do for a living. I think the ranch management is a perfect example of that. I think the first 2 years of college is nothing except building a bunch of money for a college. I mean, you're going to go to school to become a doctor. You spend 2 years learning to do volleyball, bowling, and do a bunch of crap that has nothing to do with a doctor.
Grammar.
Let our bright minds become doctors in ranch management. Just like electrician. If you go to school to be an electrician, you go straight to work as an electrician. You learn on the job training, best electricians in the world. And everything's a little bit different, but I think we do the same thing with doctors. You take the smartest kid from a high school, he wants to be a doctor, let him go to work for a doctor, let him just take chemistry classes that he needs, physiology, things for his degree, and we can speed up the process and in 2 or 3 years quicker have a doctor or a specialist.
I guess it would be the vetting process would be the hard part to make sure that they're qualified.
Well, they're going to be, one of their peers is going to be teaching them to do that. So when you get kids that come to your restaurant to work for you, and y'all are a high-end restaurant, what is the cull rate where you're getting rid of these kids that aren't going to make it? Is it 30%, 50%, 10%?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it kind of depends. At some point, I think in the restaurant business, there's always a little bit of a churn because some wait staff are always looking for the best next option. I would say it was probably higher 10 years ago than it is now, because I think right now there's um, there's some people that want to work that type of a job that have a lot more options now than they used to,
Mm-hmm.
and by that I mean, I'm going to call them a gig job, but people can be a server at the restaurant, or they can just take a gig job, which means that they're going to drive an Uber and Uber Eats some, but then if they can work in a temporary position at Dickies Arena in Fort Worth, they'll jump on that. But they don't have any schedule, and that's what they want in their life, So I think, for us, a lot of times, a lot of our servers are coming to us, but they're coming to us when they've already been a server at another location. And this is mainly in Fort Worth. In Alpine, a lot of times, this might be their first server job. But in Fort Worth, if you get a server from Papados or Papacitos, for the most part, they will do a great job. Part of it is because Papacitos and Papados, they've got a good training program internally, and they've already showed that they've got the skills to be a great employee and server.
I tell you, the servers I feel bad for the Cheesecake Factory. That menu is bigger than the Bible.
They do have a big menu.
I couldn't imagine having to memorize that freaking thing.
It's pretty. They're a great company. There's a company that it's a company that I actually look at because they're a public company, so that in their annual reports they publish some really great numbers regarding the restaurant business and revenue per square foot. And if you haven't been around in Fort Worth, there's another restaurant called the Flower Child in University Park Village, but that's actually owned by Cheesecake Factory. And if you walk in Flower Child and Cheesecake Factory, you'd think that these are such a far departure. How could the same restaurant basically own and manage them? But they've done a great job.
Revenue per square foot.
Well, and I think Cheesecake Factory always hit off this a long time. And so when I graduated TCU, I went and worked for a hedge fund for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got some financial background. But a lot of the Cheesecake Factories, their growth model, because God, back in the late 90s, they only had 10 or 11 locations, compared to now they might have 60.
Yeah.
But they decided to put themselves in a lot of malls, right? A lot of shopping destinations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those shopping destinations that are selling soft good retail clothes, it's all about revenue per square foot. And a lot of restaurant leases, they're basically, you got your base rent, but then you got percentage to rent on top of a break point. So your base rent might be up to $5.5 million, and then anything over $5.5 million, you might have to pay 5 or 6% percentage rent. So that revenue per square foot, obviously is important for the restaurant, for their success, but it was also important for the landlord because it basically increases the amount of rent that they get.
Right.
214 cheesecake factories now in the United States.
Oh, wow.
California has 38 of them.
Yeah.
I like cheesecake factories. My wife's not a big fan no more.
Oh.
She's just not. She says, I don't know why, but she's just, so we don't go there as much as we used to. But it used to be good. I used to like them. I like to read, so I could go there. And then next door was always a Barnes and Noble.
Yep.
Was common. And the one that we go to, if we go to the one in the Metroplex, is the one in South Lake Town Square.
And I really feel like I think people are moving away from the chains and going back to the mom and pop shops. Kind of like what you've got with the Reata.
Yeah, I think we're a little bit unique because I think and especially I'll talk more about Fort Worth than I will Alpine, because Fort Worth, we basically always moved into second generation spaces. So we opened up the restaurant in Alpine in '95, and then that fall the president of Bank One had come hunting with us, and ate at the restaurant there, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come and open a restaurant in Fort Worth?" Great friend of ours, still a great friend of ours, Bob Simple. So we opened at the top of the Bank One building, but that had been a private club called the Century 2 Club. So it was the whole top floor of the building. So we went from a small town, Alpine, Texas, population 5,500, to downtown Fort Worth at the top of a 35 story building, and to a 14,000 square foot restaurant. So I would say on average, that's a lot bigger than the family owned, the mom and pop restaurants.
Sure.
But it was a second generation space. But I think the most interesting thing about us moving into downtown Fort Worth is I think there was this huge transition in how people thought about working and living. And I call them like the fat lifestyle developments. And you mentioned it a minute ago. The South Lake Town Center is a great example of lifestyle development, where you're intermingling restaurants and retail. And on the second floor, you have office buildings and dentist offices and things like that. And then you'll have brownstones and places where people can live. All that intermingled together. That's when we moved to the Bank One building, that was at a time when you built an office building in a downtown, you basically put a private club in there, probably less as a money-making venture, but more as an amenity for your office tenants.
Mm-hmm.
And now the thought is that, hey, we're going to intermingle just normal restaurants with those office buildings and retail developments. And I think when you're doing that, one, I think you get a better experience, for not only the office tenants, but also for the general public.
And that place was hit by the tornado?
Exactly. So we were doing great. March of 2000, we just had our 25th anniversary of the tornado hitting Fort Worth. Tornado came through Fort Worth about 5:45 in the evening, I think about 6:30 in the evening. Came through and hit the restaurant. We were lucky; we got everybody out safely. But then we were closed for 42 days. But then eventually reopened in that building. But we were the only tenant in that building until January of 2001, and then we were kind of forced to leave. But it was cool because even with being the only tenant in the building, we had replaced the glass with Lexan because that's what we could quickly buy to get back opened. But we were still doing great sales in a building that had been basically boarded up and looked like it had been in a war zone.
Boy, it did too there for a little bit. My buddies, that was where their office was in that building also, I believe. That was a big hit for the city of Fort Worth. And it's funny how we get growth back. Fort Worth is a perfect example of how they've kind of regentrified, I guess is the word for it. That whole area down there is really nice. And you feel safe there. I don't ever feel safe in Dallas. Never. I don't care where I'm at in Dallas.
What about Deep Ellum?
Hell no. I feel like John F. Kennedy in a dang car ride there. It's terrible. But Fort Worth, you don't have to get very far to the east of Fort Worth, and it gets pretty bad too when you get to around the bridges and where they have the haunted house place over there. I forgot the name, by the bus station. Woo, that's a sketchy area over there.
Well, I mean, like any big city, I mean, we've got our good areas in the city and the bad areas. I think, one of the lucky things in downtown is that we've got downtown Fort Worth Inc. So you've got a public improvement district and some tax instruments financing that helps make downtown as nice as it is. During the day, they call them our, day and night, you've got these ambassadors that just walk around to offer people directions or things like that. But also, if you talk to the police, they're also kind of that first line of defense of seeing issues that are happening. So they're extra feet on the ground. And then, through downtown Fort Worth Inc. and our community police officers here in Fort Worth, you have a once a month downtown security meeting where they bring together basically anybody that wants to go. There's some residents, there's businesses owner like myself, but then you have like the security people for the office buildings, the security people for all the different hotels. They all attend this meeting. And because a lot of times, a problem individual is usually a problem individual at a lot of locations. Mm-hmm. And then, I'm very active in Fort Worth. I'm vice chair to the Chamber of Commerce, but we just basically produce this homeless toolkit for our chamber members in Fort Worth. And it's basically kind of a helpful guide of what you can do to help with the homeless situation around you and your business. It's kind of crazy now, but all the homeless people, they still all have cell phones.
Oh yeah.
So, having exposed electrical plugs where they can plug in their phone is going to have more people hanging around your business than a place that does not have that, right? Unsecured Wi-Fi is almost the same way too. They got cell phones, they're using Wi-Fi, there's stuff like that. So, that being said, we've got the Hope team within the Fort Worth Police Department that helps with that. I know there's some other resources here in Fort Worth to help on getting some of these homeless people back into housing. So I think it's a bunch of different areas to attack any problem.
Did you see where John Bon Jovi, I guess, has a restaurant in Tom River, New Jersey, and he feeds the homeless for free every day. Well, the people in that community are raising hell about it. Because it's like a magnet. So I guess it's in a trendy area and stuff. And now they've got homeless people are sitting there waiting to get their 2 meals a day all day long.
Wow.
And and I would not be happy about that either.
And I think that, his heart is in the right.
Yes,
in
100%.
the right place. So it's hard to get too mad at that. But there is some of these issues, and and I think sometimes it's a little frustrating to some of us that are in business that we can't get enough employees. But there's people that just decided that the way that they're going to make it is not work and panhandle or work off society instead of going out and getting a job.
99% of the people listening to this podcast agree with you, and I don't even know if there's a 1% that don't. But John Bon Jovi has made millions and millions and millions of dollars, and he's got his heart is in the right place. But he's not thinking about all them businesses around there that them guys are trying to get. They're scraping to make a living sometimes. And if I'm with my family and I'm going to go eat and I can have to walk through a bunch of homeless people to get to where I'm going to eat and drug heavy, I'm not going to bring my family down there. I'm going to go somewhere else. That's why I think that Sundance Square and to where y'all's area to the convention center is so nice, because there's not much of that down there.
Yeah, and we've done a great job in Fort Worth doing that. I mean, you've got downtown as an area. You've got the South Side, which has since we've opened in Fort Worth has really built up along South Main down to Magnolia. You've got a lot of development happening in the museum district, along with with the Crescent and the Bowie House, and then the stockyards. I joke with people. 30 years ago, if you were looking for a fight, it was pretty easy to find one in the stockyard. But now, especially that Mule Alley area and the new development with the Drover Hotel, it's very safe. It's very gentrified. I think you talk about Dallas a little bit. I think that's part of the reason why you continue to see all the sprawl in Dallas. Is one, I think people are looking for better schools, but also sometimes it's almost easier to build, in the green field than it is that, and that's why, for me, some of the more impressive places in Dallas are really the Legacy area, the free, up around Legacy, Frisco, and then the new Omni there in Prosper, with the PGA golf course is kind of incredible.
That's crazy. Prosper's getting that big. I tell you, a little town, or not a little town, it's a big. Abilene, Texas is 100,000 people, same size. I grew up in Wichita Falls. And by the way, Wichita Falls had the option of the state hospital or Texas Tech, and they chose the state hospital. Big screw up by Wichita Falls back around 1900. But Abilene, Texas is a sister city to Wichita, about the same size. Wichita Falls has nowhere to eat hardly at all. They've got a couple of places. It's Cheddar's and stuff like that, Red Lobster, Olive Garden. That's it. You go to Abilene, they've got mom and pop restaurants, and they've got an area downtown that we go to now that is clean. It's very safe down there, and they've got every corner has got some kind of local eatery there, and it's very good. And when we go to Abilene, that's where we go. I can't think of the last time we went to Abilene and ate at a chain. And we go to Abilene a lot. You go to the regular, and that's why I like the downtown Fort Worth area the same way.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, obviously, in and around the Abilene area, my favorite place is a Perini Ranch Steakhouse. Tom and Lisa Perini are great people, and I think they just celebrated their 40th anniversary. So they've done a great job for a long time.
They are a cool place, and but that Buffalo Gap area is really nice.
Yeah,
and they've been around a long, long, long time.
The failure rate to restaurant, it's incredible. It is like 85% or something like that. 85% of restaurants that open don't see their 1 year or 2 year anniversary.
It's really high. So,
yeah,
and it's a tough business. And I think there's different levels because I'm in the situation where, I'm managing and hopefully helping out my teams, but I've got to have people that can run that restaurant on a daily basis without me being involved. There's also the basically the owner operator restaurant, which certainly lowers your overhead a little bit. I think the hardest thing in the restaurant business is can you do that 7 days a week? Can you do that 5 days a week and still cover your overheads? Because everybody needs time off, even the owner operator, they don't need to burn out either. So there needs to be a little bit of a balance there.
Yeah, that's got to be tough. We're in the hunting industry, and there's some people that do open up a hunting industry, and they do everything. owner operator. They guide hunts, they scout, they clean birds. I don't know how they do it. I mean, our busy season, our peak busy season is November to February, basically, where you're going 7 days a week, hardcore. I don't know how they do it.
No, they
I mean, we have a team. Jeff has his role. His brother has a role. I have a role. We have a guide staff. We have a kitchen staff. I could not imagine being the one and only or having one other person. Just the burnout.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
well, and I think, and even if you're having to hire staff, it's hard to hire staff for 4 months or 5 months, and not offer a kind of a yearly job for them. So, how do you get creative with your staffing?
I had my niece is fixing to leave to go to college, and she's going down to the Fort Worth area to go to school next year. And I asked her, I said, what are you going to do for work? I said, you're not going to have to work at all. Cause I could see Tony not making her work at all. And she said, no, I'm going to get me a job. I think I'm gonna get a waitress job. I said, Kylie, I'm gonna give you some advice here. I said, I've never been a waiter in my life, and I don't think I have the patience for it. But if you're going to get a job as a waitress, try to not get you a job. And I'm going to pick on this company. I'm going to say Cheddar's or Chili's. Probably a pretty good college job. But I said, try to get a job at a higher end restaurant, because 15 to 20% is a whole lot better on a $200 tab than it is on a $30 tab. And I said, when you work at Chili's or places like that, you're dealing with a bunch of people your age that are going in there to eat that don't know how to tip, or they don't have no extra money. You want to go somewhere where you have older people that have a little bit thicker wallets, because they're going to tip better. What's the average tip at your restaurants? Is 15 to 20% about average, or is that low?
I think 20 is average.
20 is average now. I'm a 20 to 25% tipper if it's good service. I'm a 0 or 25% guy. And it very seldom do I find a bad. If I have someone that's just terrible, I don't give nothing. But usually I'm 25%. My guides work for me. I'm a very good tipper, but I also expect good service. So 20% is the average tip.
I would say so. Yeah. I think we all kind of do it differently. I mean, for me, if I'm going in for breakfast and I'm only spending $10, right?
Yeah.
I'm probably giving a lot bigger tip there, because I know that I'm only spending $10 and it's just me, right? But I think I'm the larger the bill it gets, I think it gets more around that 20% range.
I get 2 tea to goes every time I go to Wichita Falls. I like a coconut tea I get, and I get one for there with lots of ice, and I get one with no ice, because I'm gonna bring it home and put it in the fridge, and I can drink on it for 2 days. If you go at a certain time, it's cheaper. And I don't know, but I hit it a lot of times. It's like $6.18 for 2 40-ounce teas. I give them a $10 bill and I walk out. That's a really good tip for those girls. But I wouldn't be tipping 35% if I was spending $300 or $400 taking a bunch of people out to eat, probably. But I do at a tea place, so maybe she'd be better off to work at tea to go.
Yeah.
Well, to your point, I do think that, and I'll take Reata out of the thing, but if you go get a job at a Delphris, if you can go get a white tablecloth, that's great. If you can't, you can go work at a Papados or something like that. I think the other skill that I think it teaches any young person is how to interact with the public.
Yes.
And, if you and I are meeting there and it's a business meeting and we're focused on business, your job is to basically be, almost invisible. You're there to get our order, make sure our drinks don't empty, but you're not there to interact, right? That being said, if it was maybe like the group that you brought to Reata, where, it's after the trade show for the Bassmaster Classic, it's a whole bunch of people just having friends. They want to have maybe a waitress or a waiter that are a little bit more interactive, and tell us what are you doing in town, and what's the favorite things, and what other questions can I answer for you about this city?
Yeah, that your manager there. It's not Bo. What's that guy's name? That's the manager.
Tim.
Is it Tim? Kind of bald headed guy. He works at the bar area at nighttime. Gosh dang it. And he was outside. He was the night manager or the manager, I think. Well, really nice guy. Anyways, he's super friendly and goes out of his way to help people. Very good. Because I've been in there the last 3 times I've been there. I asked him questions about something, and I'm a question asker. I'm not one of these guys that don't ask questions or directions. I want to save my time, so I ask people, and he does a really good job.
That's the hard part about kids today, though, is not a lot of them have this social interaction thing dialed in yet. Just because
I think that's a skill that you can really learn as a waiter or waitress. Because even if you're shy, it's easier when you're a waiter or waitress, because basically, one, you're doing your job, But one, you kind of get a routine down of how to interact with those tables. And then over time, you're going to make it more unique to each table and start reading those tables and figuring out how do they want to be interacted with.
Yeah. I don't know. I just see a lot of kids on their cell phones now that don't ever even look up.
Andy was a waiter at when he was at Tech for what, 3 days?
Yeah, it didn't work out for me, Mike. I wasn't very good.
You didn't like it, did you?
It was tough. It was tough. That's all I'll say.
And you do a good job with customers.
Yeah, I'm good with customer service, but
just not your cup of tea.
Wasn't my niche. But that's the good thing about college is that you can go try these different things, and it's not make or break at that point. You know what I mean? I didn't have a wife. I didn't have kids. Like, whatever. If I got $3 left over at the end of the month, then we're doing okay. So you can kind of go out there and feel out your way in this world and try to navigate that without the freaking sky falling if it doesn't work out.
Yep.
How many of the finer restaurants didn't survive COVID, like percentage wise, like where y'all are at 10, 20, 30%? Because it's funny when me and my wife travel a lot and we'll go to places and we'll look up restaurants like we're in Boston or New York or big city, and a third of them aren't even in business anymore.
I think most of them survived, I think I might be at a little bit different position because sometimes I think when I go into a restaurant, I'm probably reading it differently than the average customer is. But some of the ones that didn't survive maybe had less to do with the restaurant, maybe had more to do with the landlord. You have something like COVID, and the landlord basically sticks to his things, saying, I want the same rent that I've always gotten. But when he was trying to market that space to you, he was saying, hey, you're at the bottom of an office building that's got 3,000 people in it. Well, when COVID happened, for a long time, you didn't have 3,000 people in there, you had 500, right? So at some point, if you want to keep that restaurant there, give them some rent relief for a period of time, because I think that's going to be a whole lot easier than trying to replace that restaurant in 2 or 3 years once you come out of COVID. I think we've all seen restaurants that closed that we thought were successful restaurants, probably were successful restaurants. They probably ran up on the end of their term. The landlord came in there and said, hey, I want 30% more. And the restaurant looked at it and said, it's just not worth it for me. I'm going to close. And then 3 years later, that location is still empty,
Yeah. I think
that landlord would have been better off if they would have taken the same amount of money and would have had no lapse in their rent. They'd have been better off than trying to increase rent.
And a lot of those office jobs still haven't come back, right? Like a lot of people they haven't gone back to the office since COVID.
I think for the most part, at least in Fort Worth, I think for the most part that they have.
Okay.
Federal government, no, but everyone else, yes.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think for the most part they've had, but there are some people that, Jamie Dimon, who's JP Morgan, I mean, he's been fairly vocal about this. But I mean, he's trying to make his office buildings really, really, really nice. Because they're going to require people to come into the office. But you're going to have a great time while you're there, and that being said, in a lot of those businesses, if your job is to market to businessmen and businesswomen, who maybe don't have the option of working from home, you don't want to be talking to your financial advisor saying, well, I can't meet with you because our office is closed. Right. It's like, well, shit, I figured out how to make it to work. All my employees figured out how to make it to work. I'm only going to work with people that have that same drive.
Yeah. I just know a buddy of mine that works for a big corporation. They have an office building in Chicago, and they realized that nobody, like, the only thing that office was being used for is getting mail. So they send somebody there twice a week to pick up the mail. So they're like, why are we paying for this high rent office district in Chicago, and nobody's going there?
Yeah, that's let me ask you this now from an outsider. It seems to me like Uber Eats and these different DoorDash and things, seems to me as a restaurant, that would be perfect because they don't take up space. Is that good or bad for business? Now, they don't buy extras like appetizers and drinks. So is Uber Eats good for businesses or the restaurant businesses overall, or stuff like that not as good?
I think for certain businesses, I think it's fine, right? I don't know that it's good for a big steakhouse because one, I think steaks in general, they don't carry very well. You don't want to get a steak that's 20 or 30 minutes off the grill. Or if you do, you almost have to tell a person, cook it rare, tell the restaurant to cook it rare, and then I'm going to stick it in the oven under the broiler for a second when I get home. I think the bigger thing is, and we don't really do Uber Eats and that kind of stuff right now, but I think they're taking 20 or 30% in some cases of the revenue of the sales price.
Right.
So restaurants, I don't think can really afford to take the 20 or 30% markup. That being said, there are some places that when you look on those apps, the prices on the app are more expensive than you see when you come into the restaurant. So the restaurants have basically published a second set of prices there. Now, obviously, really good friends with John Bonnell here in Fort Worth. One of his concepts is Buffalo Brothers. I think they do a ton of Uber Eats or DoorDash or some of the delivery services. One, I think, for the pizza and wings, I think it's a great product that carries really well. And I think, he's done a great job negotiating with them on their rates.
So I did not. So if Uber Eats buys from you, they pay y'all 20% less than what someone else comes to eat.
Or 30.
I wouldn't do that either then. I didn't know that. I thought they paid y'all market price and then they just marked up at 10% to go deliver it.
No, and like I said, we've not gotten into it that much ourselves. And I think, and a lot of that stuff you can set things, the hardest thing about the restaurant business is we still do 45% of our business on Fridays and Saturdays. You probably see the same thing. Every restaurant is busy on Fridays and Saturday nights. But if you go in there on Monday or Tuesday, aren't that busy. The difference, I think, with us is that if you look at other businesses that are that lumpy in their revenue, they basically offer variable pricing to help drive people toward those slower times. You certainly see it with the airline industry, and you see it with hotels. But the restaurant business, we don't change our prices depending on how busy we are. We just, for marketing things, that's why we really try to do everything we can to drive those sales on that, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's part of one of the great things about being in downtown Fort Worth is that you certainly have the office traffic for lunch during those weekdays. And more than that, having a convention center there, if you can have those business conventions that are weekday conventions, that helps drive additional business during our slowest times.
Yeah, because it seems like there's always something going on downtown.
Yes. But I just didn't know how the Uber Eats deal worked because you see more and more of that stuff. But and I didn't know if that was what you'd like to have or if it was something that hinders you. But I would think in a high-end restaurant, you want people to have drinks and appetizers, not just to order a steak to go and be the end of it.
Yeah, you do. You do. And obviously, everybody talks about alcohol. And alcohol, certainly its cost of sales is very good. Now, what I don't think people realize is that the restaurant has to pay an additional sales tax to the state. So it really adds to your cost of sales. But it's really easy to execute making a drink. You need a bartender and some ice and you can start making drinks. Where if you think about all the different people that go into making your dining experience at a restaurant, that labor on the food is much, much higher.
Yeah. And I got a kudos to you guys. Y'all had a fantastic bourbon selection. I'm a little bit of become a bourbon guy in my later years, and your selection was fantastic.
So, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, kudos. How much has your menu changed? How many times do you guys add items? Do y'all take away items as if it's not?
We
selling?
do a little bit. It does not change that much.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you. And we've got some good friends that have some farm to table restaurants that are constantly changing their menu, and they do a great job. One that's not quite us, in our previous location, we had 5 private dining rooms on the main level. We had a private dining room downstairs that would seat 60. We had a dining room on the rooftop that would, a dome that could seat 100. So we did a lot of private events. But a lot of times when you're doing these private events, you're now picking menus that are 6 or 9 months in the future.
Mm.
So it's hard to totally change over your menu when you've already made commitments on menu items for a private event, 6 or 9 months in the future. On the other hard thing, and I joke about this a lot, is that we change something off our menu and people get mad. They're like, "Oh my God, you took my favorite thing off the menu." We've got a jalapeno and cilantro soup, which is a cream-based soup where it's heavy cream that's reduced by like 90%. And one year I took it off in the summertime because I figured a heavy cream-based soup's probably not really conducive to summertime.
Right.
And if you compare, but I'm looking at the back end too. I look at our tortilla soup and our jalapeno cilantro soup. The tortilla soup sells 400% more, 4 times as much.
Mm-hmm.
So you try to make a change and say, hey, maybe we can change a jalapeno cilantro soup out to something else, and kind of close that gap. Well, God, I mean, I got more complaints over that than almost anything we've done, which kind of gets you gun shy about changing things on the menu. Is because if you don't get a lot of complaints anyways, and you make a menu change and you get a bunch around that, it's like, well, God, is it worth it?
Right.
That is the best soup I've ever had, though. The jalapeno. I loved it.
And I think it's a great soup. And I think, for you guys, that are probably sitting out in the cold for a couple months a year, it's a great soup.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know that it's a great soup in July when it's 103.
No. It's a winter soup, but it is I've bragged about that soup. That's my favorite soup there is. That, and I had cream of avocado soup in El Paso one time that was really good. And then me and Michelle were at Mackinac Island in October, and it was cold. I mean, it was 35 degrees and spitting snow. And they had a pumpkin soup, and it was outstanding. I'd never had I'd only had it one other time. It wasn't good, but it was very, very, very good.
Yep. So that being said, we've got our menu that's pretty set, but then on a weekly basis for lunch, we'll have a burger feature, a buffalo burger feature that changes. We have a featured salad that changes every week. We have a soup that changes daily. At dinner time, we'll have the same thing. The soup will change daily, but then you'll have a chop feature that will change for different combinations. So we try to add some variety that way to our menu. But it is always a constant struggle.
What's the most popular item? Chicken fried steak?
It's very high. Pan-seared pepper crusted tenderloin has always sold very, very well for us, along with the ribeye.
I like the chicken fries. I get there. I can eat a steak at home. That's why I don't eat steak when I go out. I'd rather have fish or the chicken fry. And my go-to meal at y'all's place is chicken fry, the grits, and the jalapeno soup.
Yep. And I'm kind of like you. If I go to our restaurant, other restaurants, for me, I call them the secondary cuts, but it's like for us, it would be the carne asada. But some other restaurants, it might be a flat iron steak. I know ribeyes and I know tenderloins are great. And you want them cooked where the chef doesn't screw it up. But you love to see the variety and what they can do with, the secondary cuts, the flat irons, the carne asadas, and see how they prepare those.
How hard is it to keep a good chef these days?
I think there's some difficulty. I think for us, we basically, we want a great team. I think we're a little bit lucky because the bigger that you get, the less reliant on any one person you are. But there are a lot of chefs out there that they're looking to build equity in their name. Mm-hmm. Where for Reata, we're wanting to build equity in the Reata name.
Right.
I don't mind. We're totally happy with the chef getting some press, and there's times that's going to happen. But our real goal is building equity into the Reata name, not any one person's name.
Yeah. Is dealing with a chef kind of like dealing with like a rock star or a musician or an artist, I guess I should say? Just sometimes you're just like, well, what's wrong with you today? And they're just off.
I think there's all kinds of chefs out there, right?
Yeah.
So there's it's kind of like the whole left brain, right brain. Mm-hmm. There are some chefs that are incredibly creative people, right? But those people tend to be bad managers, right? And then you can have guys that have great skills, right? But are maybe more right brain that are better managers, and that's the person that I'm looking for. Because I'm looking for that person, that can can manage the back of the house, and that, we're open 7 days a week, literally closed 2 days a year. But when the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo is going on, we've got 2 offsite restaurants there at the rodeo. So we need multiple chefs that we can basically float around to those pop-up restaurants and any caterings that we're doing, along with making sure that the experience for our downtown diners remains the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I just see guys like Anthony Bourdain, and like, it just the thought of like keeping a thumb on some of these chefs it's got to be just, some of these guys just have to be impossible to keep a thumb on.
Yeah, but I really do believe that it's an unfortunate thing that I think every food writer, they really want to talk about the chef when they come into a restaurant,
right?
And they really need to be talking about the restaurant in general. Because, over time, sometimes the chefs are incredibly important, but sometimes it's that front of the house manager or the front of the house owner that they're the ones that's really driving that experience, and not really the chef. And I really do think it's all about the experience. It's from the moment that, either you park your car or you walk into the door, every interaction you have with basically that locale and the staff there is going to affect your experience. So you could have the best meal in the world, but if you never got your drink refilled, you may not have a good experience. You might say, "God, that was a great ribeye," but I would have sure liked another Crown and Coke.
Right. No, that all makes sense. Yeah, everything has to work together.
What? Okay, I'm gonna ask some weird questions here. What's the biggest tip anybody at your place has ever had that you know of?
$600 maybe. Well, I don't know. 600. It's probably 600. I mean, but I would say that's an individual tip with an individual table.
Right. So you've
now,
never had.
Sometimes, what we do is, sometimes we do those private events that we talked about, especially at our overall location, where somebody might have rented out the entire rooftop. They might have a food and beverage minimum. And then they have to give 20% of that. So that's going to gratuity to our servers, right?
Right.
And in that case, it's a whole team of people,
right?
But it's probably not directly answering the question that you asked.
Well, my question was like, someone come in and had just a guy comes in and has a drink and something to eat and leave a $500 to $1,000 tip, because you hear about people. I saw where Charles Barkley left 10 grand the other day somewhere.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was wondering about. Have you ever had a group of, you've had some celebrities come in, you ever had someone that wanted an area by themselves and they didn't want nobody else around?
Yes. And then we've had people that we thought might want a private room. And he didn't, it was Kevin Costner, they filmed a lot of Yellowstone in and around Fort Worth and that kind of stuff. And, we had a private room prepared for him, because, our fear is that another customer in the restaurant comes up to that person, and asks for an autograph or asks for a picture. And we don't want that affecting that celebrity's experience. But he didn't want that. He just wanted to be in the main dining room. So, it's great to see situations like that where people are very much down to earth and don't want to be treated special.
Yeah. What's the protocol for like the wait staff? If somebody like Kevin Costner comes in, like, listen, just wait on him, be cordial, don't bother him.
Exactly. Now, that being said, we've been catering the Park City's Quail Banquet for the past couple of years. And they honor different people. And a couple of years ago, they honored Kevin Costner. And obviously, the waitress that had worked for us for a long time, had done a lot of caterings, and had been around a lot of famous people. But obviously, she was tickled to be waiting on Kevin Costner. And it really wasn't Kevin, it was one of his buddies. But I don't know if he just sensed it or he just knew. And he said, "Hey, you want your picture with Kevin?" To her. And she said, "Well, sure." Right. So his buddy is the one that basically, threw her into that position. So that's great. It's great. It certainly made her night. But it's great to see that, that I think, with any of these celebrities, their friends know what they have to go through on the positive and negative, but they also realize that maybe the impact that it has on somebody, when they do take a picture with them.
Yeah, and that's cool. That's cool with you guys. If it's offered by somebody in the party, yeah, get your picture taken with them.
Yeah, it's for sure. Because I mean, now I wouldn't be happy about their server basically saying, "Can I get a picture with you?"
Right.
But if they're offering for the server, that's totally okay.
Yeah, yeah. What other big names have come in there that you remember just off the top of your head?
I mean, over the years, it's been a lot. I mean, you've had Tommy Lee Jones in there, you've had Robert Duvall in there. I mean, certainly Taylor Sheridan has been in there. And they're filming Landman right now in Fort Worth.
I saw that at TCU, right? Or is it all over the place?
All over the place. I mean, they've been there. They've been at Bowie House. But it's been something that the city of Fort Worth, through our Visit Fort Worth, has been behind. We've got the Fort Worth Film Commission, which is really set up there to make it easier place to film. But I don't know that people always realize the economic impact that some of these movies have. But Landman's crew is probably 200 people, and those people are staying in hotel rooms, which means that they're paying hotel motel tax to the city, which is incredibly important. But then when you bring a show like that into the city, they're spending lots of money on a daily basis with all the businesses here in Fort Worth. That's really creating a positive economic impact. And we saw it out in West Texas. We did a bunch of movies on our ranch back in the day. I mean, there was a movie called The Good Old Boys with Tommy Lee Jones and a young Matt Damon. And I still remember Tommy Lee Jones basically saying, Matt Damon, "Oh, this kid's really going to be something someday." Because, at the time, I don't know if he was 17 or 18, but he was certainly a young actor, and he certainly wasn't the born ultimatum person that we know now. Yeah. But and the reason why I'm telling that story is that a lot of these movies come to the States because the state offers a film incentive. And it's just like when, conventions come to your city or something like that. A lot of times they're basically based off the sales tax that you're going to generate in that state. But for a long time, a lot of those movies moved to, originally it was Canada, and then it was New Mexico and Louisiana, because those states had big film incentives to get those movies to come there. And that being said, it was with our help of one of our state legislators that I guess 2 years ago, we really did a better job cementing that film incentive program in Texas. It was Craig Goldman, who's now a U.S. representative for us. Because if not, those movies, especially a lot of those Westerns, they don't have to be filmed in Texas. They can go up to New Mexico.
Right.
And over time, when a movie comes to your city, so many of the crew, there's so many rentals related to it that it's easier to go back to the same place. And even though the movie changes, the director might change, that crew stays the same. And, I think that you've kind of seen it with Yellowstone, and I think the public doesn't know this, but with Yellowstone, you had Yellowstone, then you had 1883, and then you have Landman. Well, a lot of that crew that's probably working on Landman right now probably has worked on Yellowstone, in the past. It's just the directors change, the story changes, but that crew sticks together.
Right. Yeah, I think I saw a clip. I think it was Rob Lowe, and he was talking to somebody else, but he's got a game show, and he's like, we film it in Ireland. He said it's cheaper to fly everybody over to Ireland, bring in 100 Americans for the audience than it is to walk across the yard at Fox in L.A. So everybody's leaving L.A. and going to these different places. And I'm glad to hear that Fort Worth was proactive and, or that Texas was proactive and got some of this industry here.
Yeah. So, and let's be honest with you. So when you're in downtown Fort Worth, we had it last week and they did a great job, but they're filming in and around the Fort Worth Club last week. There's some street closures, some stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you're a citizen of Fort Worth, you might be inconvenienced a little bit, but remember, all this tax revenue that comes into Fort Worth hopefully helps lower the needs of the city to increase your property taxes in the county. So it's a good thing in the end for the city.
Where does the hotel motel tax go back into? Where does that money go back?
Some of it goes to the state, some of it goes to the city. Part of in Fort Worth, some of that growth goes to Dickies Arena.
Oh, okay.
So that's part of how it gets fun. When they did Dickies, and I can't remember the exact calculation, but I think growth in hotel motel tax in and around the convention center in downtown and Dickies Arena, plus any growth in maybe the liquor tax was basically going to the pool to help pay for Dickies Arena. So Dickies Arena basically got built with basically some private funding, and then this without having to go to a city bond.
Do y'all have an EDC that gets a big portion of the hotel motel?
I'm not sure. I don't think.
We went to Dickies, went to Disney on Ice 2 weeks ago, and that's a nice place. That's the first time I'd been in there.
Well, obviously they had the Bassmaster Classic there, the weigh-in, but more than that, the best, Dickies got a great management team over there. I think they can sit 12,500 with a concert at the end. They can sit 14,000 with a center concert. But they had the American Conference, the American Basketball Conference had their convention in town the week before the Classic. And I'll tell you, those fans are sitting in my restaurant because you see them, you see a whole bunch of fans with Memphis jerseys eating at your restaurant. So certainly those are people that would have not have been in Fort Worth if it was not for that conference. And then you have a lot of concerts. You have things like Disney on Ice, which we did not have a venue to hold that. We had the old downtown convention center had this arena that was built in the 70s. And in the 70s and the 80s, it was a good spot. I think the Rolling Stones even played there. But it's one of these things, there's always the next new thing. And in the Metroplex, that has been the Cowboy Stadium, American Airlines, where the Globe Life, the Ranger Stadium, and then over in Dallas, the American Airlines Center, where the Cowboys are, where the Mavs and the Stars play. The nice thing about Dickies is they don't have a professional team there, basically taking up time. And taking up more than important than that dates. So they got a lot of flexibility to go after concerts and different events.
I saw where the Mavericks are wanting to get a new arena built now, which after trading Doncic or whatever his name is, that to me doesn't look like a very good timing on their part. I guess their lease runs out with American Airlines in 2 years, maybe.
I do not know any of the details, but I think I think obviously there for a long time there's been a push in the state about maybe legalizing gambling.
Yes.
And I think some of the new owners of the Mavericks certainly have ties into that. So I think part of the thought would be maybe a new destination arena that would maybe combine it with the casino. But I think it's a lot more complicated than I think what people think.
I think Sheldon Adelson's wife owns the Mavericks, and he owns the Sands Convention Center in the Venetian. Yeah. He's a big-time billionaire, and that was the plan. I heard that they wanted to build it at the old Texas Stadium where it was at, that piece of property there. They want to build an arena. And
yeah, I've kind of heard the same thing. And I think I was in a group called the Texas Lyceum that meets 4 times a year, talking about issues affecting the state, and we actually covered gambling. But God, this was maybe 10 years ago. And at the time, I think the issue is that you couldn't control if the state decided to go to class 3 gambling, and I might have the terms wrong, that you couldn't control anything on government land. And like in Oklahoma, if you go up to Oklahoma, originally I think Oklahoma's plan was to have 5 really nice properties, but that would be it across the state. But because of the federal land and the Indian reservations up there, they couldn't control everything on those. So all of a sudden, now you've got slot machines and gambling at all these truck stops all over the state, instead of having 5 really nice properties that people were going to travel to. I'm not here to tell you that. I'm not here to argue if gambling's good or bad for the public. Unfortunately, I think if you're in North Texas and you're 70 miles from the border in Oklahoma, and there's a lot of gambling up there already, I think any of those ills our society is already having to deal with.
Can you imagine the amount of money the lobbyists at WinStar Casino are paying to keep gambling from opening in Texas?
So my issue when we covered it, it's all about the loss of government control, right? Because I think some of us, if you could have, you know, 7 or 10 regulated properties that were really nice across the state, then I think everybody'd be more open to it. But we don't want to see, at every truck stop, slot machines.
That's what it looks like in Montana. The state of Kansas, I believe, has 2 casinos. Maybe I think they got 3. They got one up by Kansas City, but Kansas Star is one of them that's on the interstate between Wichita and Oklahoma City, and I think they're owned by the state of Kansas. I think owns, and I can be corrected on here, but I think that is how that works. I don't care if I want to go to gambling. I can go to right across from Wichita Falls is where I go to the casino at, and I enjoy going there. It's an hour drive, but I think Texas should have. South Padre Island should have casinos on it. Galveston Island should. I wouldn't care if you had a designated area in Fort Worth, a designated area in the Austin area, in San Antonio, El Paso. But is it fair to let a select group of people own it and not open to everybody to apply for the same license? And that's where you get into. Because I think that's the way in New Orleans is. I think the Harrah's Casino is the only casino in New Orleans. And I think that I know this for a fact because the guy hunted with me. He was one of the original partners with Harrah's. Well, once they got to a certain level, they kicked him out. They bought him out, and he had no choice but to take their money. And then they ran it themselves. So it's kind of a slippery slope. But everyone around us is, if it wasn't for Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma gambling casinos along the border would be shut down if it wasn't for Texans.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of the things that we don't really realize, what an economic powerhouse, Texas is, and I love, there's a map out there that shows, DFW, and then shows all the states there with a population less than we have in DFW.
Yeah.
Obviously, I saw you when you were here in town for the Bassmaster Classic. We got 7.5 million people in DFW. There's only 5.5 million people in the whole state of Alabama, and that's where Bassmaster is based out of. So, we really do have an economic powerhouse here in Texas. And it's interesting. I mean, I guess they're in Abilene. They're talking about that new big data center.
Yes, huge.
For AI, we have all these opportunities because, let's be honest, we produce all this oil and gas and do technology that's continued to increase. But on the flip side, we've got all this wind generation and all this wind energy too. That's sometimes producing a lot of cheap power.
We're going to, I saw there's a model right now out that shows the Dallas-Fort Worth area in 2000 and was it 50?
I was just looking that up.
I think it's like going to be 40 million people. It's going to be the biggest metropolitan area in the United States.
By 2100.
Okay.
This is estimations. Dallas DFW Metroplex is projected to become the largest in the United States by the year 2100, potentially surpassing even New York City. This is estimated that DFW's population could reach 33.9 million by that time.
Where in the hell are we going to put these people, and how are you going to get down a road? You already can't get from, and you probably drive a different way, but when I go to the airport, I used to cut across from like Buc-ee's Texas Motor Speedway and go the backside in through South Lake to go to the airport. From my house, I used to be able to get to the airport at 2 hours and 45 minutes. Now it takes 3.5 to 4 hours to get there because of traffic. From Buc-ee's to South Lake is terrible now.
We just got to start. My concern is really water. I think that's the thing that we're short on in Texas. So if we can, we need to be building as many lakes as we can. And I'm certainly sorry for the ranches that that lake might get, might flood their ranch. But we certainly need to start managing our water resources as well as we can.
I think Wichita Falls is fixing to start building Lake Ringgold, and it's going to be a pretty big lake. It's going to be well around Ringgold, Texas.
And you said y'all are at 7 million right now?
I think it's 7.5 million for DFW.
Yeah.
Oof.
So 4 times as big. So it's going to go from Oklahoma border to Bowie to Canton to Waco to almost Abilene.
This is according to DallasCultureMap.com. Houston is projected to top out at 31 million. Austin is projected to go to 22 million.
Good Lord.
But where are all these?
And Austin, if we think we have water problems, Austin's got a lot bigger problems. that whole Colorado River changes. You see how quickly Lake Travis gets drained
Yeah.
every year. It's pretty dramatic.
Desalination or build canals from up north that come into here. I don't know why we don't have a canal system in western Kansas, western Nebraska, and the Texas Panhandle coming off the Missouri River anyways. A lot of that water runs right into the Mississippi and right out into the Gulf of Mexico, and we could utilize some of that. Same with California and their water issues.
This is even talking about how much warmer DFW would be if that were to happen.
Oh, all that concrete?
DFW would experience more than 130 days of 95 plus degree temperatures. And water scarcity is another thing it says right here. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I don't think I'm going to live to 125, so hopefully I don't have to experience that. So
Yeah.
I think we're both safe on that deal. We won't see 2100. But I can tell you that I'm 57 years old, and in the last 40 years, I've noticed a dramatic change. I remember when Six Flags was not in the middle of town, and I remember when there was actually country between Fort Worth and Dallas.
Yeah.
And that ain't happening. You know, Texas, when they built Jerry's World at Arlington, there were some people that griped and bitched about it. There was a lot of people, you know. It's been the best thing happened to Arlington. You know, Dallas has got to be sitting over there wondering, what the hell's going on? Our football, we don't have a football team here no more. They're not for sure they're going to have a basketball team. There's a good chance that basketball team might move to Las Vegas. I mean, she owns it and do what she wants with it. And that's where they're from. So Dallas could be without any pro sports franchises here pretty quick if they don't watch it.
So
yeah, it's crazy. Well, Mike, we appreciate you being on here. The Reata Restaurant is a wonderful place. We appreciate you. Every time we come to Fort Worth, I look forward to going to, and I appreciate you being on there with us.
Anytime. Really enjoyed talking with y'all and have to come out and hunting with you at some point.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Is that a Eurasian widgeon behind you?
It is. Yep.
I've got one on the wall in here in the lodge. That's a beautiful, I think it's the prettiest bird there is.
I kind of agree with you. So, I mean, I think obviously wood ducks for me are still kind of incredible, and that we get to see them around Fort Worth is really nice. But yeah, I'm with you. So
we don't have any of the, we don't see we killed a wood duck this year, first one we've killed forever. Are y'all starting to see Mexican tree ducks all over Fort Worth too now?
So are that the black-bellied whistling duck?
Yes.
Okay. I saw some. It's probably been 2 years ago. But I mean, I'm not looking for them. My sister lives on a little private lake here in Fort Worth, and there was some on her lake. So now we've got some like out in West Texas where the ranch is. They call them Mexican ducks,
right?
But they look like the big female mallards.
Okay, yeah, that's a mottled duck or a Mexican duck. But they
right. I certainly see those out in the Alpine area. So, but then, you know, I haven't seen too many of the black-bellied whistling ducks, and certainly have never killed one. So
we had a lot of them here the last 2 springs. I haven't seen any in town yet, but this is about the time of year they start showing up, and they're all over town. And it's just crazy that 10 years ago you never seen kind of like white-winged dove. 20 years ago we didn't have white wings here, and now we got more white wings than we do mourning doves.
Well, you know, like we've got a ranch in West Texas, and you know, I mean, you know, 20 years ago, you saw a couple hogs. Now we see, you know, hogs all over the place. You know, before we really didn't have any elk, and now there's free ranging elk all over West Texas. It's pretty crazy.
Are y'all seeing bears yet on the ranch?
There's a few coming through here. I don't know that we have a population. You know, if it was up to me, I think there's enough bears to actually have some kind of a limited season on them, because I think at some point, you know, we can't hold these apex predators so much on a pinnacle. I think we need to be managing them. And there are people that are having issues of them scratching up their cars and things like that. So I think at some point, very limited, but I think you could start, you know, some kind of a draw system where people would maybe draw a bear tag, and then all the landowners that basically maybe wanted to get rid of a problem bear that was on their property could sign up to be in that group. And be included, because it seems like for the most part there's a lot more bears south of Alpine. There's a couple developments south of there, but they're certainly seeing some bears. And then kind of right in the middle of the Davis Mountains. Now, you know, I don't know if these bears came up from Mexico or they came down from New Mexico, because really, you know, if you look at a map, you know, from Guadalupe Peak up into Cloudcroft, you know, down to the Davis Mountains, there's almost kind of there's mountain ranges and travel corridors that whole distance.
We're seeing we have wild elk here that we had some that got out of high fence and they've had, they've bred and stuff, but we've got some elk here, and luckily they're on big ranches up here, and the people that have them don't want to mess with them. They don't shoot them, leave them alone. We'll have more and more of them. But elk are getting to be more and more common all through the Midwest, which they were a plains animal anyway. So I'm happy to see that. And then I know there's a thriving deal in the mountains down there, but y'all are in big mountain area around Alpine. So
yeah, so we're base elevation out there is about 4,500 feet, and we've got some mesas and a lot of cedar trees and stuff like that. But to your point, I mean, I think elk are more grazers than they are browsers. And if you went back 20 years ago and you'd say, what are some of the better elk areas in the United States? It wasn't always just the deep mountains of Colorado. A lot of times it was, the San Carlos Indian Reservation, there in Arizona and stuff like that, which is very much like the kind of a higher grassland, juniper, pinyon, forest.
Well, they're definitely coming back, and we appreciate that. We thank you very much for being on here, Mike.
Absolutely.
Take care of yourself. You be safe, and God bless you.
God bless you. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you.
Very good. All right. Let me leave the studio. There we go. All right.
Very good restaurant. Check out the Reata in Fort Worth. All right. Thank y'all. God bless y'all, and have a great day.
Watch for deer.